Hi to all of you linked with us digitally. I want to thank Paul Andrews and Victoria Javoyan and all who have persisted to produce this first, all digital, Contact in the Desert. Today, my presentation is about brains to galaxies. The key is frequencies. In other workshops I'm doing, I'll open up my ever-growing files about alien intelligences and mysterious agendas. If you would like to know more about my work, please see my books and documentaries at my news website, earthfiles.com, and visit every Wednesday night my live Earthfiles YouTube channel broadcasts with breaking news, Earth and space mysteries, UFO whistleblowers, and live questions and answers from viewers around the world. And now first, some background. I graduated in 1968 from Stanford University with a master's degree in communication, where I produced documentaries at the Stanford Medical Center and the Stanford Linear Accelerator and reported for the Stanford Chaparral, and always had cameras around my neck. My goal was to report about science, environment, and medical breakthroughs in TV news. I worked for KNBC in Los Angeles, WCVB, the ABC affiliate in Boston, and then became director of special projects at the CBS station in Denver, where I produced, wrote, directed, edited, and reported documentary films on flatbeds like this one. I also produced live studio audience productions about Colorado environment, technology, and science issues, including NASA astronaut training at Moulton, Marietta. Then, in the summer of 1979, news erupted in Colorado about bloodless, trackless mutilations of cattle, horses, and other domestic and wild animal mutilations, in which there was no blood on the cuts and no tracks around the dead animal bodies, even when animals were lying in dry grass and dust. Even stranger, some animals had missing internal organs, such as hearts, without any surgical cuts into the chest. Veterinarians had no answers. Then, when I contacted retired Logan County Sheriff Tex Graves, who had investigated dozens of bloodless mutilation cases, he told me, quote, "Linda, the perpetrators of these bloodless animal mutilations are creatures from outer space," close quote. When he said those words, I felt the sting of an electric shock, as if my very soul jumped, wanting me to know that day with the sheriff was the turning point of my life. As if I were plucked from one path without UFOs and ETs onto another path in which UFOs, ETs, and the high strangeness of this universe would dominate my work for the next 42 years, right up to this 2021 Contact in the Desert virtual conference. But back in 1979, I didn't understand the irony that as I pursued answers to who or what was mutilating domestic and wild animals all over the world, that I was making contact, opening my mind for the first time in my life to the actual existence of other life in this universe. With every night watch that my crew and I saw strange moving lights in the sky above pastures, with every rancher who saw light beams projected from round lights in the sky that raised or lowered an animal in a beam of light, with every mile I traveled to ranches to gather tissues for pathology investigations, and with every broken hip and leg bones that meant the mutilated animal had been dropped from a high altitude, my mind was opening to the reality of other life forms interacting with our planet. But why? Why would they be harvesting tissues and fluids from so many Earth animals? How were they extracting large hearts and other organs from inside grown cows without any external cuts on the body and not a drop of blood inside the cow's chest? Could there be an existential survival urgency for the alien perpetrators? If we knew who they were and why they needed organic tissues from Earth, would we feel compassion for them instead of anger and fear? Could Earth's first trade route with another life form in this universe be to sell farm animals to ETs? Over the next 9 months, I worked 18-hour days without let up to produce the 90-minute documentary broadcast called A Strange Harvest. The audience that night was the largest ever for a Denver station-produced program. The phone didn't stop ringing and the mail didn't stop coming from people all over the United States and Canada, and then came mail from other countries. I didn't know then that I was only scratching the surface of what I would come to see is like a 16-layered chess game. Professional, controlled remote viewers who work for the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency in Washington, D.C., were in the 1970s reporting confidentially about their classified program, and they were saying this universe is teeming with consciousness and other life forms. And all those trained remote viewers also reported that when it came to alien agendas, there were friendlies, neutrals, and hostiles. But why? Why would the most recent standing up primates on Earth that we call Homo sapiens sapien, us, have any enemies when we are a baby civilization in the big cosmic scheme of things? And why can't we humans meet the friendlies who the remote viewers say help protect humanity from the hostiles? It was not until my first 3 books had been released between 1989 and 1999 that I received an invitation from a friend at the World Bank to meet an analyst retiring from the Defense Intelligence Agency. He knew a lot about extraterrestrial biological entities. The 3 of us traveled to a neutral location chosen by the DIA agent. When we sat down, his first words were, "I don't think our satellites can penetrate this white noise." And we were surrounded by water and boat engines. And then he began. My work for the DIA has been to monitor and analyze 3 competing extraterrestrial civilizations that use Earth as a laboratory for all kinds of genetic manipulations and terraforming. Our government has proof that the non-humans have fought over the Earth laboratory for at least 270 million years. What proof, I ask? He said, it's too dangerous for both of us to discuss, even in this white noise. But he told me astonishing details about the symbiotic existence of alien intelligences based deep underground, deep underwater basins, and deep inside mountains on Earth. Their technologies neutralize gravity, provide complete invisibility, and 3-dimensional holographic camouflages that deceive humans. The variety of forms in which the aliens appear suggests not only different octaves of intelligence, but mixed forces at work with mixed motives within those octaves. No matter what our defense strategies and technologies are, the human race is weakened by ignorance about the situation. History teaches us that often the common good is better served if state secrets are open to public consideration. For if there is one truth that humans have a right to share, it is that something is tampering with this planet physically, psychologically, and spiritually. Humanity deserves the truth, especially if that truth requires a revolutionary new perspective about our history and our future. I am convinced that a common source of energy pervades all there is and can be an ally to living consciousness. That energy, I think, moves in cycles like this spiral, found on ancient rocks in England, Ireland, and the island of Crete, dating at least 4,000 years before Christ. Part of the old symbol's meaning is that the machinery of the universe involves the evolution of souls. The spirals are not static and not two-dimensional. The symbol is a slice. A larger reality can be imagined as a spiral upward and downward through innumerable other frequencies or dimensions. Ancient wisdom understood that the moment of death was simply a transition into another frequency on the spiral. So all lines in all directions are simultaneous and filled with life forms ebbing and flowing, supported by a singular force, an invisible matrix of energy from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. This is a toy hologram projector that projects three-dimensional dinosaurs and other creatures. Do you remember the hologram of Princess Leia that projected by R2-D2 in Star Wars when we could hear her desperately calling Skywalker for help? These holograms are not photographs. They are not using trick mirrors. The word hologram comes from ancient Greek, in which holo means whole, and gram means to record and write all lines of letters. It is a system that collects and stores a 3D virtual object that is not really there, but was originally a 3D object that the holographic recording system preserved as a frequency memory. The first time that I heard someone say, "This is a holographic universe," it was Bud Hopkins in 1991 after a Midwest UFO conference. Bud had written the book Missing Time about people who describe being taken into UFOs by non-human beings. At that 1991 conference, everyone was talking about a newly released book entitled The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. The subtitles on the book's cover were a remarkable new theory of reality that explains the paranormal abilities of the mind, the latest frontiers of physics, and the unsolved riddles of brain and body. The author, Michael Talbot, was only 38 years old, and his mind-blowing hypothesis that our universe was being projected by something else, maybe from another dimension, was the topic of many discussions at that 1991 conference. Afterward, Bud and I had the same airline flight back east to New York and Philadelphia, where I lived at the time. We sat next to each other to talk about some new abduction cases, and he surprised me when he said, "I'll tell you something, confidential. Michael Talbot has been one of my UFO abduction cases, but he doesn't want anyone to know because he's afraid if people knew the truth, they might not read his book." And Michael told me the truth is that the entire holographic universe, the whole concept that he has written about, was given to him in a telepathic download by the extraterrestrials who have been abducting him. Sadly, Michael Talbot died a year later at age 39 from lymphocytic leukemia. And then Bud Hopkins died in 2011. Now, in 2021, Michael Talbot would feel reinforced by some astrophysicists who are now even writing papers that hypothesize our universe is a 3D hologram projected from another dimension. At the beginning of 2017, scientists from England, Canada, and Italy published in the Physical Review Letters what they call substantial evidence that our universe is holographic. This is one of their research illustrations, where time runs from left to right. On the far left is the gray and blurry holographic projection, not yet well defined, that carries what scientists call imprints of information to build stars and galaxies. Far right is the 3D holographic projection's geometric phase of trillions of galaxies, where Einstein's equations apply and energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. It is those imprints of information in our universe's oldest 13.8 billion-year-old microwave background radiation, shown here, that suggests we are in a holographic universe. On Earth, our lives are dominated by solid matter, but people who have had near-death experiences or have traveled out of body or have been abducted by alien intelligences, they return to tell us that our matter world is a three-dimensional illusion projected from two-dimensional flat sheets, imprinted with information. If we are in a 3D holographic universe, it has to be projected from another dimension or another universe, because you cannot have the holographic projector inside the hologram. And each detail in that 3D projection is produced from a different phase and amplitude of high-frequency electrical and magnetic waves of light. Perhaps the first human to envision this universe as a projected hologram was Emmanuel Swedenborg. He lived from 1688 to 1772 in Sweden and became best known for his 1758 book, Heaven and Hell. He also became famous for his ability to enter deep trances to leave his body. He said he went to heaven and conversed with angels. Swedenborg said he was surprised to find that in heaven there are also spirits from other planets, an amazing public statement more than 300 years ago. And like our 21st century efforts to understand the true nature of this universe, Swedenborg's out-of-body experiences provoked him to say that even though humans live life as separate from one another, we are actually connected from the atomic level on up. Swedenborg saw that underlying the visible matter universe was a wave substance that connected every particle of the cosmos. Could the all-connected wave substance in this multi-dimensional universe explain how some human minds can remote view other planets in our solar system, or see the future, or sense invisible danger, or receive telepathic communications from non-humans, or even move matter by focusing the mind's attention? In the context of looking into the future, in the past few months, many viewers of my Earthfiles.com news website and my Earthfiles YouTube channel that I broadcast on every Wednesday night, a lot of people have sent me letters and emails about dreams of massive floods inundating our planet. Some viewers have wondered if the flood dreams could be subconscious metaphors for the awful global pandemic of COVID. And then others wonder, could it be an example of how human brains can resonate with the entangled frequencies of this universe and pick up on signals from the whole cosmic fabric? A big part of that cosmic fabric are frequencies and mathematical shapes called fractals, like the spirals in this illustration. There is a man in Washington State who has been convinced we are in a holographic universe after he was nearly murdered. His name is Jason Paget. Today he is 51 years old. He had no education beyond high school and worked for his father in a mattress and sofa store. He had no interest in math and never heard the words holograms and fractals. But when Jason was 32 years old in 2002, he was nearly killed during a vicious beating by thugs at a karaoke hangout in Tacoma, Washington. In the hospital after the attack, Jason's skull and brain were badly damaged, and suddenly he began to see everything around him in geometric patterns, moving like motion picture film. He went from a normal guy to the very rare condition of acquired savant syndrome. And that's when a person acquires remarkable musical, mathematical, or artistic abilities after a severe injury or a disease. And for Jason, he began to see shapes in his mind that were so beautiful that he had to try to draw them. Each fractal pattern emerged in his mind's eye in a different color, using only a sharp pencil, ruler, and compass. Jason began hand-drawing perfect fractal patterns like this. The rare mathematical accuracy and perfection of his hand-drawn fractals led to a book released in 2014 entitled "Struck by Genius: How a Brain Injury Made Me a Mathematical Marvel," co-authored with Maureen Seberg, a writer for Psychology Today and Oprah Magazine. Jason Paget went from never having seen a fractal to seeing everything around him in fractal patterns like this and motion picture frames like watching a movie. Jason's brain even saw his own hand as a fractal pattern, and here is Jason's sketch of what he was seeing. There is a name for this brain condition that turns numbers into shapes like fractals. It's called synesthesia. Fractals like this black Mandelbrot set pattern bordered by branching Julia sets were not even in public discussions until half a century ago in 1975. That's when IBM mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot put a small equation in a big computer and ran it over and over for hours to see what would happen. He ended up with this remarkable shape called Mandelbrot set after him and bordered by Julia sets. He called it a fractal after the Latin word fractus, meaning fractured. And the fractured pieces are all self-similar, exactly replicating the same patterns from the smallest to the largest scales. That same self-similar pattern is found in Mother Nature's geometries, like this nautilus shell that spirals in a fractal design, and like this tree that is a good example of a real-life fractal that keeps branching in a self-similar pattern. At the largest cosmic scales, galaxies also spiral in fractal patterns. And since his brain was battered in 2002, Jason Paget has continuously seen fractal patterns instead of hard matter surfaces. Even looking at his own skin, he sees fractal patterns. Jason Paget also thinks that we are in a 3D holographic universe, where the key to everything is frequency, from the vibrating vacuum to fractals. Many universes and dimensions could exist simultaneously, like notes in a chord of music, where each note is a specific separate frequency, but the chord is a combination of all of the frequencies. Each frequency could be a different dimension. Some people, after encounters with non-human beings, say they are told that human souls are recycled in and out of many different container bodies in different dimensions, where each dimension is a different frequency. Some UFO experiencers say that reincarnation the recycling of souls, is the machinery of this universe. Here now is an excerpt from my discussion with Jason Paget in 2002, when he was 46 years old and he had been seeing fractals everywhere around him for 15 years. After the 2002 attack, what was the first difference that you noticed?
The smoothness of how things look when they move was gone. Have you ever drawn a flip book on pages where you draw a cartoon character and you change it and then you flip the pages and it looks like the cartoon character is moving? Mm-hmm. It's like that, but real time. So when you flip the pages, you can tell it's jumping from one spot to the next.
Right.
And our brains normally smooth out that jumpiness so it appears to be continuous, even though it's not continuous. It's individual frames. And that's the way the universe works, too.
You would see frames like we were looking at video or movie frames moving.
Yes, yes. My brain isn't smoothing them out. We are jumping through space-time. So there's like 1 million, billion picture frames per second in the real universe. That's that quantum leap that you always hear people talk about.
Is it true that you also are seeing pixelations the way we think of digital pixelations on a computer?
Exactly. That is what was one of the most beautiful things about it, is that it makes everything that moves look like it's moving relative to a grid. In fact, when light bounces off water, it builds a grid, what appears to be a two-dimensional hexagon lattice or a three-dimensional grid. And space-time is a three-dimensional grid structure. So imagine like a piece of graph paper in algebra. Space-time is like this 3D grid, and the pixels are something called the Planck Length. The Planck Length is the tiniest piece of space that can exist. There's nothing smaller can be observed than the Planck Length. A good way to think about it is like we want to observe something. We're hitting it with photons. The photons are emitted back, and we see the geometry of what we're trying to observe. When you try to squeeze two light waves into a space that is smaller than the Planck length, it causes that tiny region of space to collapse into a black hole, which then absorbs the photons, and there's nothing left to observe. So everything in the universe is made up of these exact Planck lengths. So think of the universe as being just like a TV screen where the tiniest of the pixels get are one Planck length, like squares with one Planck length on each side.
In the spring of 2016, there was a conference held back east in which Neil deGrasse and Elon Musk and others came together on the question, are we living in a digital computer simulated universe?
It definitely seems to operate exactly like the holographic universe principle. The holographic universe, you can overlay a grid of Planck length pixels like on the room that you're in, and what is on each one of those little pixels describes reality.
Mm-hmm. If we are in a computer simulated universe created by some other advanced intelligence, what are we humans?
Everything is just pure geometry, and all the equations that exist are always describing geometry. So geometry or shapes is what math is.
Is it possible that the dark matter and the dark energy relate to this concept that we are actually in someone else's advanced intelligence experiment, a creation of a simulated computer universe?
It's possible. Physicists talk about how there could be different cosmological constants. A cosmological constant that's much bigger than the one that we have would rip the universe apart, and one that was smaller would make the universe contract and collapse back into a singularity. If we were in a universe that didn't have this cosmological constant the way it is, it couldn't exist, because those universes with a cosmological constant that aren't exactly this one don't ever exist long enough for life to evolve.
Well, Good at Harvard has had the hypothesis that there are an infinite number of universes. We are in one. Is it possible that all the other universes, if they exist, have different physics?
Yes. When I think about how the universe and the multiverse works, every time I come down to thinking and believing, even though I can't prove it, I am a firm believer in the multiverse theory, because it always comes down to fractals.
But who would set it in motion?
The one thing that just is geometry. And geometry is numbers. All equations are just geometry, and geometry is space. What you need to have space is nothing. The emptiness, vastness, nothing of space is geometry. And then you have all equations. When I talk to professors or friends, I always try to tell them, try to think of something that doesn't have geometry. Anything. And so far, nobody's ever been able to think of anything. Even thought itself is a brain wave that leaves our head. That's energy that interacts with things on a tiny quantum level. So it's geometry.
Do you think in your mind now, after being struck by genius, that there is a fractal structure to the universe? And what I'm thinking of is myself and many others were introduced for the first time to fractals through the crop formations going back to the 1980s and the early 1990s. One was the Mandelbrot that is defined on the edges by Julia sets.
Right.
If the Mandelbrot is defined on the edges by the Julia sets, is there something fundamental about the Mandelbrot and the Julia sets as a structure that our universe may mimic?
Absolutely. The definition of a fractal is it's a shape that when you decompose it into pieces, the pieces are the same as the whole. And so the universe, by being this giant 3D grid structure, breaks down into tiny little smaller 3D grid structures, which breaks into smaller grids, which breaks into smaller grids. So the universe itself is a perfect fractal. You take it apart into pieces, the pieces are the same as the whole. And the Mandelbrot set is an equation that is being put onto a computer screen grid.
Do you have any conceptual image that has ever come into your brain since you were beat up that you think comes close to what the actual universe structure is?
The way that I view everything is just basically as waves. And the universe itself is like a wave that is rippling outwards, like a fractal.
I'm looking at your beautiful sketch. You call it the quantum hand. Is there a relationship in your illustration to what appears to look like light coming from the center of the hand to photons and to the concept that all matter is frozen light and that we are, in essence, photons?
Yes, I believe everything is light, and everything is moving through space-time exactly at the speed of light. So light is absolutely paramount to everything.
And is that why some people's hands can heal?
The more I get into it, the more I have a hard time discounting anything, because the universe is so much weirder than science fiction. I know that people who are positive heal faster, so our minds can do amazing things, and our bodies can do amazing things. When you think about the quantum weirdness of the universe, that you can be in an infinite number of places at once, that there's a multiverse, that we can be inside of a large computer program, to think that somebody could somehow do something like that isn't so strange anymore. And we know that space is geometry, and that is numbers. And we've also found that nothingness, the vacuum of space, vibrates with quantum fluctuations from uncertainty. And so now we have a vibrating grid structure of nothingness that always is, that will always vibrate from uncertainty, and that is infinitely large and infinitely small. I mean, you pretty much got the ingredients you need for all math, which is basically just a grid structure and something that allows things to at least appear to move across the grid. And the way that I'm describing the holographic universe principle, where each little pixel has a piece of Hawking radiation on it that is coming from the event horizon of a black hole.
Can you take all of this and move the track to the whole question of the soul that animates the biological containers?
I think of the soul as being like every tiny quantum movement and measurement of me. From the moment I'm born till the moment I die, that is me and my soul. Matter is energy. E equals mc squared. So matter literally is energy, and matter can become energy, and energy can become matter. They can switch back and forth forever, but they're never destroyed. That means the matter that is me has always been and always will be. It's been light, it's been trees, It's been in everything. A lot of people talk about what happens after you die. But when you're dead, your energy is not in a form that can observe time. Time is meaningless. So we know that this universe is 13.8 billion years old. Do you remember waiting to be born? You were in dinosaurs, you were in stars, but to you, it was instantaneous. You've always existed. When you die, you can't observe time. So time is meaningless to you. So you don't notice that time go by, just like you don't notice the time waiting to be born. So to me, when you die, the next thing you know, if there's an infinite number of Big Bangs, dying is being born. The next thing you would know is you're just popping into existence again in the next universe where it's identical to this one, but I'm left-handed. Every single possibility happens eventually in an infinite amount of time.
So the soul could be some sort of substance designed and made specifically to take all of the frequencies of a conscious life into it for recycling.
Yes. And the universe just automatically does that.
Nearly 40 years ago, the United States Army's Intelligence and Security Command in Fort Meade, Maryland, was studying Robert Monroe's gateway process of brain-mind techniques that include traveling out of body, even into outer space, and the concept of a holographic universe long before scientists recently have published really serious papers that we are in a holographic universe with the profound implication that every atom and photon is connected to all other atoms and photons. And this 1983 paper was released through a FOIA request to the CIA, which finally released the classified report in 2003. Paragraph 12 states about holograms, quote, "Energy creates, stores, and retrieves meaning in the universe by projecting or expanding at certain frequencies in a three-dimensional mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram. Holograms are capable of encoding so much detail that, for example, it is possible to take a holographic projection of a glass of swamp water and view it under magnification to see small organisms that are not visible in that water to the naked eye when the glass itself is examined. The whole concept of holography, despite its scientific implications, has only been known to the physicists since the underlying mathematical principles were worked out by Dennis Gabor in 1947, who later won a Nobel Prize for that work," close quote. A 2014 medical discovery of quantum vibrations in microtubules inside brain neurons supports the theory of consciousness by Nobel Prize-honored mathematical physicist Sir Roger Penrose and his colleague, anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, MD. The two scientists theorized that consciousness derives from quantum vibrations picked up from biological structures inside the human brain that resonate with quantum vibrations in the holographic universe. Doctors Penrose and Hameroff said about the microtubule discovery, quote, "Our theory suggests consciousness derives from quantum vibrations in microtubules that are protein polymers inside brain neurons. Both govern neuronal and synaptic function and connect brain processes to self-organizing processes in the fine-scale, proto-conscious quantum structure of reality," close quote. The scientist's argument is that the human mind is also a hologram that attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange through the microtubules. One of the scientists in the U.S. Army Consciousness and Hologram Study concluded, quote, "Contrary to what everyone thinks they know, it might not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness is what creates the appearance of the brain, close quote. And that is the ancient concept of the thought that dwells in the light, and that's all there is. Theoretical physicist David Bohm came to that same conclusion. He wrote, quote, "Mass is a phenomenon of connecting light rays which go back and forth, sort of freezing them into a pattern. So matter, as it were, is condensed or frozen light. Light is not merely electromagnetic waves, but in a sense, other kinds of waves that go at that speed, and therefore all matter is a condensation of light into patterns that are moving back and forth at average speeds which are less than the speed of light." Even Einstein had some hint of that idea. And you could say, when we come to light, we are coming to the fundamental activity in which existence has its ground, or at least coming close to it. And I am so grateful that something in the divine cosmos wanted me to experience that all mass is frozen light. It goes back to when I was 21 years old. I lived in a house where my dad always said God was the breeze and sun and the cold water coming out of the hose when he washed the car. And my mom said all life was precious, and she always carried bugs and spiders out of the house in dust rags. And it was those two philosophies were as close as our family ever got to religion. And when I was 21, I went on a camping trip with my younger brother and a cousin, and we went up into the remote Salmon River country of Idaho. And every day I would explore and exercise by hiking up a mountain that was near our campsite. And late one afternoon, as I was walking back down, I saw orange gold beams of light. They were coming down through some lodgepole pine. The sun was setting behind the mountain, and the low angle cast the beams in the shimmer of the dust of the forest trees. And I was stunned by the beauty. It was as if I had never seen light before. And I began to walk toward these rays of light. I wanted to just get close. I wanted to get into them. I can clearly remember that as I moved toward the light, that my arms and my legs started moving like in slow motion, like if you sped up a camera. I went really slowly toward these stunning orange, yellow beams of light. And then my next memory is being further down the mountain, and near my feet, I see a small blooming wildflower. And the petals were pulsing with an intense white light, and it was edged by this orchid glow. It was beautiful. I was confused. I wanted everything to go back to normal, and I began running. I ran several yards, and when I stopped, the pulsing light had spread to all of the blooming wildflowers as far as I could see. And behind me, I turned, and the mountain, it was moving as if it were breathing. And then the silhouette, as it slowly seemed to be breathing, a few stars came out right above the mountain. And they were pulsating with the same orchid white light that was in all of the wildflowers as far as I could see. And then, as if an unseen force gently took hold of my arms, I watched. I wasn't doing the lifting. Something was bringing my hands up in front of my face. And I heard a thought voice in my mind say, "You are one with the light. The light is one with you. and you are in the hands of God forever. And then this kind of warm pressure on my arms seemed to relax. And I found myself, my hands going down in awe. And then the flowers, stars, and the mountains stopped pulsing. And below me in the distance near the river, I could see a fire. It was my brother and my cousin, and they were cooking dinner. Black shadows outlined by the firelight. It was as though someone had lifted up the surface around me for a while to let me see what was really underneath, pulsing light. Since then, I have been convinced that a common source of energy pervades all there is and can be an ally to living life. That energy, I think, moves in spirals like the spiral before us, found carved in rock all over this planet. Part of the old symbol's meaning is that the machinery of the universe involves the evolution of souls. The spirals are not static and not two-dimensional. The symbol is a slice. A larger reality can be imagined as a spiral upward and downward through innumerable other frequencies or dimensions. Ancient wisdom understood that the moment of death was simply a transition into another frequency on the spiral. So all lines in all directions are simultaneous and filled with life forms ebbing and flowing, supported by a singular force, an invisible matrix of energy from which everything emerges and to which everything returns.